أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. My dear elders, scholars, brothers, sisters, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I feel I'm in the wrong place here. It's a very big chair to fill up. You'll all agree with me, you're used to seeing figures the likes of Sheikh Sakalashfar or Sheikh Mansoor Leghai or Sheikh Shamili. So I would have been more comfortable to be on the other side of the table. But in their absence, I will make an effort of being a spare of spare tires, not even a spare tire, a spare of spare tires for this function that we have gathered for. As you all know, we have gathered here to remember Marhuma Amina Bai Jafar Ali Muhammad, the grandmother of Arif Bai, and also to remember Muhammad Qasim Nasser, a young boy who passed away in Toronto a few days back. Definitely, you have an old lady who's passed away, but you also have a young boy who's passed away. And definitely there is a big message in this, that death does not choose. Everybody has to die, and there is no age to this, there is no race factor to this, there is no financial status to this, there is no geographic location for this, there is no geographic limitation for this. People could pass away here, people could pass away in the West. So indeed a big lesson for us. Whenever it comes to death, there are two ways of remembering the deceased. One, of course, is to sit and remember any good habit or good practice of the marhum or marhuma and make an effort, a sincere effort to put it into practice. And because of that effort, what happens is the soul of the marhuma or the marhum gets blessed. They get the thawab of you practicing that sunnah. Now, I have not known this, the marhuma who passed away and the young boy who passed away. May Allah give their families the sabr to bear the loss. But I would not be in a position to describe their sunnah or their practices. So we'll come to the second way of remembering them, and that is to remember the factor that has separated them from us. The very thing that has caused them to go ahead in this journey of life, and that is death itself. So this moment, at the time of death, yes, it's a sad moment. It's never a happy moment. It's always sad to lose a loved one. But we also have to realize that it's a very blessed moment. Why? Because it's a process that could bring about spiritual elevation. When a person takes lesson, the patience that he has during that time, these are all causes for spiritual elevation. So one needs to be vigilant, he needs to be alert and to make use of this moment. Not only that, but relatives meet, so there's Salah Raham taking place. There are mu'mineen who meet to come and give their condolence. So that is also thawab, people coming to meet. So definitely it's a spiritual moment. It's a blessed moment. So we need to take hold of it and spiritually elevate ourselves. So talking about death, understanding death or remembering death, there was an article that I read some time back on the BBC website. So it was talking about the happiest people in the world. Now I have talked about this in my other previous lectures. Some of you might have heard it. For those who haven't, alhamdulillah, it will be nice to share it with you. For those who've heard it, please forgive me, but inshallah, reminding is never a loss. So the article was about finding the happiest people in the world. Who are the happiest people in the world? So the answer to that was the people of Bhutan. Bhutan is a small country, northern India, south of China, Tibet and Nepal, and you have Bhutan right in the middle. So Bhutan, all the countries just now, IMF or World Bank would judge the economy of a country. For example, Tanzania, they would look at the GDP. What's the GDP? And based on that, they would look at the progress of the country. Bhutan was one of the first countries to toss this GDP into the bin. He said, we are not going to follow this GDP. They came up with GNH, Gross National Happiness. So the king of Bhutan says, I don't want to see how the economy is doing. I just want to see how happy my people are. So now you see Dubai also following. They have a Ministry of Happiness. Then there's a Minister of Happiness to see how to make the citizens of Dubai more happy. But Bhutan was the pioneer. So the article's heading was Bhutan's dark secret to happiness. What was their secret? They say there is a secret, but it's a dark secret. What is the secret? He says every Bhutanese has to stop 5 times a day and remember death. So in their day-to-day lives, be it at work, be it while playing, be it at home, whatever they're doing, 5 times a day, they have to stop and remember death. So Bhutanese would tell you that what has happened is we've become more grateful with whatever we have, because we know any time we could die. So other people are scared to talk about death, but Bhutanese remember death 5 times a day, and this has made them happier in life. So it's something that we should not be scared discussing about. Once in Dar es Salaam, not during the COVID crisis, some time back, consecutively we had deaths in Dar es Salaam. Some days 2, some days 1 death, and it happened for 3 to 4 days consecutively. And people obviously would come up with jokes now, like it looks like Malikul Maut is just moving around Dar es Salaam now. So one of them went to Sheikh Alidina, Murtada Alidina, and he tells him that it looks like Malikul Maut is moving around our vicinity, around Dar es Salaam Jamaat, and that's why so many people are dying. So Sheikh in his own way tells him that that when the Prophet, Holy Prophet went to Mi'raj, he had a chance to meet Malikul Maut. And in his dialogue, Malikul Maut tells him that I visit every household 5 times a day, waiting for the command to take his soul. So it's not only the Bhutanese, but without us realizing, Malikul Maut visits our houses 5 times a day, waiting for God's command. It's just that we are not aware. So maybe we should also have a practice, at least during maybe Salah time, to sit and ponder, he could be around, he is waiting, and this could be my last prayer. Maybe this will make us happier in life. So this is one way of looking at it. We should know that it is something that could happen anytime. There is no specific time. And Malikul Maut visits us quite often, so we need to be prepared. But through its remembrance, it could make us happier. 1. Secondly, the very verse. This also I heard it from Sheikh Murtada Alidina. He says, the common verse, of course, when we hear of news of death, we say, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi rajiun. Right from the time you were born, or right from the time you were conceived, we started the journey to go back to Allah. We feel we are growing up, but actually we started the journey to go back to Allah. But the other verse is Kullu nafsin dha'iqatul maut. This is written behind our Mayyit car. For those of you who've noticed, Kullu nafsin dha'iqatul maut. So every soul shall taste death. That's the simple translation. But in its commentary, the ulama explain it very well. They say, Kullu nafsin dha'iqatul maut, every soul shall taste death. So it doesn't say every soul shall die. It says, every soul shall taste death. There's a very subtle meaning here. Every soul shall taste death. So ulamas explain, and Sheikh explained it very well. He said, when you eat food, when you taste food, once you've tasted it, what is it that disappears? Is it the food that disappears, or is it the person tasting it who disappears? So obviously it's the food. Once you've tasted the food goes down, you don't see the food anymore, but the one who's tasted it still remains. So kullu nafsin dha'ikatul maut, every soul shall taste death. What is it that disappears? It is death that disappears, not the person who's tasted death. So when a person when a person tastes death, he's defeated death. He's not going to die again. It is death that has disappeared from his life. Ayatollah Hassan Zadeh Amuli, he talks about his mentor, and he keeps on mentioning this in his lectures. He says, we will remain forever. Nobody is going to die. We are going to remain forever. It's just that we are going to change one abode to the other. From one abode to the other, we're just going to be transferred. So nobody is going to die. So we need to understand this. It's just a small process that takes us from one abode to the other. Mullah Faid Kashani, in his book, The Spiritual Mysteries and Ethical Secrets, Mehboob Bhai was very kind enough to give me this book, and I'll ever be thankful to him. I've learned so much from this book. So there's a whole chapter which talks about death. Mullah Faid talks about death. So there's a hadith he quotes from the Holy Prophet Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. He says, Prophet says, increase the remembrance of the destroyer of pleasures. Increase the remembrance of the destroyer of pleasures. So the ashab ask him, okay, what is this destroyer of pleasures in life? So Prophet says, death. So we are told that, yes, God has given us pleasures in this world, but everything has got to be in a limit. Don't get enslaved. Don't get enslaved by these pleasures of the world. So the thing that destroys these pleasures, or it maintains a control of these pleasures in life, Prophet, according to the Holy Prophet, is death. So Mullah Faid says people have three kinds of attitudes towards death. So he puts people into three groups. So the first group, he says, they are those who are absorbed in the love of this world. So they don't remember death at all. They don't want to remember death. They are already enslaved by this world. They only remember it when the circumstances are not right. So when things go wrong in their pleasures, that's the time they remember death briefly, and then they go back to their pleasures. So Quran in Surah Jummah, which we recite every Friday, it says, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, Qul innal mawta alladhi tafirruna minhu, فإنه ملاقيكم ثم تردون إلى عالم الغيب والشهادة فينبئكم بما كنتم تعملون. Say, the death that you flee will indeed encounter you. For people who are engrossed in worldly pleasures, they are trying to flee from death. God says, the thing that you are running away from is going to catch you, is going to get to you. Then verily you will be returned to the knower of the sensible and the unseen, and he will inform you about what you used to do. So that is the first group. The second group are those who repent. So they remember death always. But the thing is, they feel we are not prepared enough. We have not completed our repentance. We have not completed our tawbah. So God, give us a little bit more time. They remember death, but they're not ready. God, little bit more time for tawbah. So for as long as they're in the process of preparation, they'll be rewarded. But from time to time they forget and they go back to the first group. So a good example that I give is, my sons here, if they have a friend coming to their house, so when you tell them that your friend is coming to your house, so they're very busy playing their games, or they're on their computer game and they're really enjoying it, or they're watching a movie and they say, oh no, let him not come today. We want to enjoy this movie, we want to enjoy this game. That is one. Second scenario, you tell them your friend is coming to your house. So he's like, I wish he had told me earlier. I want to do this with him and I want to do this with him. Now time is not enough to prepare all this. But let him come. But it would have been better if I had some more time. The third scenario is, he is so excited to meet his friend that he does not sit at home. He opens the door and he goes out looking for his friend. Where is my friend? So that brings us to the third group. Mullah Faid says there are those who have recognized their Lord and they remember death continuously, and in fact they feel that often death is delayed. They feel, why isn't it coming? So I remember my late father, Marhum, may Allah bless his soul, inshallah. I remember his words. Once we were going by car and he says, this is a big test for me. I am ready to go to my Lord, but God is not calling me. It's a state of total preparation. You've understood death and you just feel that, why isn't it coming sooner? It should have been here earlier. I really want to meet my beloved. But then Mullah Faid adds a fourth group. He said there are those, they are even higher than these three. Who are they? They say they submit totally to the will of Allah. So whether death comes or whether they're living, it doesn't make a difference to them. Whether we die or we live, we are happy because that's the will of Allah. So God wants us to live, it's for a purpose, and if we die, it's for a purpose. So we are happy. We have submitted ourselves to the will of Allah. Now, having known these four groups, we have to ask ourselves, which group are we in? Don't we ask, don't we want to know? So there's a small formula that we can apply to know as to which group we belong to out of these four. It's a simple formula. Ulama say, just see your relationship with Salah. At the time of death, God is calling you to go back to Him. In Salah also, Hayya ala khairil amal, Hayya ala al-falah. God is calling you. What is your relationship with Salah? If at the time of Salah, you are like, oh no, it's Salah time again. We just prayed and I'm so busy doing whatever I'm doing just now. I wish it wasn't namaz time. So you belong to the first group. You're not ready for that. There are some who say that no, it is Salah time, but I wish I would have prepared better. I wish I could pray with concentration. So according to Ayatollah Bahjat, in the Friday khutbah it was mentioned that if you concentrate in the time between namaz, you'll be able to concentrate in Salah. So that level of preparation. So we always say, I wish I would have prepared better for this Salah. There's a third group who say they are looking at their clocks all the time. Their whole timetable of the day, their whole schedule of the day rotates around Salah. And they always keep on looking at their watches. When is it going to be Salah time? Not only that, but when they pray, they want to pray nafil also. They want to do extra. They're so excited in meeting their Lord, so they want to do extra. They don't want to get off their musalla. They prolong their sajda. They're so excited and engrossed in their Salah. So if you want to know which group are we in, let's see our attitude with Salah. Now when I read the biographies of the Shuhada, so we live in a very blessed time. Times before the Iranian Revolution, there were Shuhada but not very well known. People really had to dig into their biographies. And the only stories of the Shuhada that they had at that time was the Shuhada of Karbala. But after the Iranian Revolution, in a very short span of time, 8 years of the Iranian Revolution, we had 250,000 youths who gave their lives. Youths. Of course, it was people of all ages, but mostly youth, 23, 25 years old, 15-year-olds. But yes, you had 50 and 60-year-olds also. So what they've done is they've made an effort to dig out their biographies, to keep the spirit of revolution alive. So we have an opportunity now to look at the biographies of these people. And you can pick a person of any age, or any economic background, or any profession out of this group, and you can relate to that person. So for example, Shaheed Ibrahim Hadi. I heard his name from a youth of 23, 24 years old. He said, I can relate to this person because he was a youth like me, interested in sports, very cheerful, energetic, bodybuilder, yet he was pious and he gave his life. So Ayatollah Khamenei says that one of the tools of appealing to Allah is paying attention towards the martyrs. If you want to approach Allah during your times of dua, go through the shuhada. Read something about the shuhada. It will soften your heart and God will definitely listen to your prayers. And no wonder when you look at the schedule of Ayatollah Khamenei, they say during his free time, he likes visiting the houses of the shuhada. Whenever he's feeling down or when he wants to spiritually uplift himself, he goes to the houses of shuhada. And after that, he feels very elevated. So this is a good way. If you go through their biographies, it's amazing. Just try it and go through it. So very recently, I was blessed to read the biography of Mustafa Chamron. Mustafa Chamron, Dr. or Professor Mustafa Chamron, who was martyred in 1981. He was the first defense minister of Iran. But a brilliant biography. And if you see the lives of this shuhada and if you compare it with soldiers of other armies, there, yes, you have stories of bravery and how they gave their lives and how they protected their other comrades and their other fellow soldiers. With the shuhada, yes, you have heroics of the war front, but their lives also, their daily lives are also amazing. If you see how they led their lives. So we'll see it in Chamron. So I'll divide his life into three. And the reason I'm talking about him is to know this third group of people, or the fourth group of people, who are ever ready to meet their Lord, or who have given their souls to the Lord, to the will of the Lord. That whatever comes, life or death, we are prepared. So Chamron, as you know, was born in Iran during the Pahlavi times. 1933 he was born, but he was brilliant, a very smart kid. And he did very well in school. He was gifted, his teachers talk about that. At the age of 15, at that young age of 15, he was exposed to tafsir classes by Ayatollah Talaqani during that time. Not only that, but he also came across, when he was a bit older, he came across the lectures in logic and philosophy of Ayatollah Mutahhari. Now these are small things. Accidentally you might feel that he came across these things. But these really shaped his life. These teenage years, the things that you people are exposed to, the teenagers here, it makes a big impact in your lives later on. So as I said, he was a brilliant boy, good brains. He joined the Technical College of Tehran. He did his bachelor's in electronic engineering. And he started teaching. That's how smart he was. So just with his bachelor's, he started teaching. And they identified him. The government identified him and they gave him a scholarship. That why don't you go to the US? So he goes to the US, and within 1 year he finishes his master's. And then he goes to Berkeley University in California. And he does his PhD. In 3 years, he completes his PhD. He becomes a professor in plasma physics and electronics. So brilliant mind, and there were very few of his caliber in the university then. But the little basic knowledge that he got during his teenage years, and this is something that we need to learn, that basic knowledge that he got, he starts applying it. So he establishes the first Islamic Students Association in the US, bringing together Islamic students in a university setup. And he was very well aware of what was happening around the world. And he had that pain in his heart that there are things happening in the Islamic world which I'm not happy about. The Palestinian issue, or what was happening in Beirut, in Lebanon at that time. So now imagine, he is a professor, numerous offers in the US, a comfortable life. He leaves all that and he says, no, I'm going to a place where I'm needed more. So he goes to Egypt under Kamaal Abdel Nasser. He joins military training. He was a professor, he didn't even know how to fire a gun. He goes to Egypt under Kamaal Abdel Nasser. He undergoes commando training. And he excels there also. He becomes the top student. And he was not young. He was in his late 30s. But he does well. But there he realizes that the Egyptian niyyah, or the intention, was not good. It was talking about Arab nationalism, how to protect the Arabs. He said, no, we have to talk about the Islamic Ummah. We don't have Arab and Ajam and African and European. No, we have to talk about the Islamic Ummah. So from there, he goes to Beirut now, 1971. There with Sayyid Musa Sadr, they meet up and they set up the Amal movement. So they say we need to set up a training area where people will come and train, and I want to teach them resistance. That you can't just accept the status quo. There's dhulm happening in the world. We need to do something about it. So he said, I'm going to train people as to how to build up resistance. So he trains Palestinians, he trains Lebanese, and he trains Iranians who came down for training in his academy with Sayyid Musa Sadr. Amazing. So this brings us to the second phase of his life. In Lebanon, he was on the war front. When the Lebanese themselves were fleeing the country in South Lebanon, Mustafa Chamron goes to South Lebanon. He says, no, we'll set up resistance here. But then a turning point in his life, not a turning point, but a highlight of his life. In Beirut, he meets a lady by the name of Ghada Jabir, who is 20 years younger to him. She's a young lady, a reporter. So she writes, now this lady again, when she was young, she was a modern Lebanese, no hijab. She was born in Lagos, went back to Lebanon. She became a reporter. But she says in her childhood, she was introduced to Ziyarat Ashura and Sayf Sajjadiyya by her grandmother. And she says, I was very much attached to this ziyarah. Now you see these small things in your childhood, how they come to benefit you later on in life. So she is a reporter, and Mustafa Chamron is a soldier, but he's also a painter. So he makes a painting which Ghada Jabir sees without meeting, and that painting really touches her. In the background there's darkness and there's a candle. And in his own words, he says that this candle may not be able to, with this candle we won't be able to eliminate this darkness, but at least we can increase some brightness in this era of darkness. She sees that, and then she goes and meets Mustafa Chamron. And they get married, but here it's not a love marriage. Yes, it could be a love marriage, but she's attracted to the akhlaq of Mustafa Chamron. What does she say? She says that Ziyarat Ashura and Sayf Sajjadiyya that I used to recite, when I saw Mustafa Chamron, I saw the walking Ziyarat Ashura. I see the walking Sayf Sajjadiyya now. The akhlaq resembled what I read in those dua books. she was so engrossed in the akhlaq of Mustafa Chamron. You know what was the dowry? Dowry of this marriage? She says dowry was Quran. She was a very rich girl. She says dowry is going to be Quran and a condition that Mustafa Chamron is going to hold my hand and take me on the path of Ahlul Bayt. This was her mahar. Nobody had asked for a mahar like this in Lebanon till then. And the best part is, the only thing I can boast or I can be proud of having something in common with Mustafa Chamron is a bald spot. I'm also bald and he was also bald. So that's the only pride I have, that at least we have some resemblance. So this lady, Ghada Jabir, she gets married to Mustafa Chamron. 2 months after marriage, her friend comes and tells her that, Ghada, you were very choosy when it came to choosing a spouse. You said, I wanted my spouse to be like this, handsome, tall, rich, all that. You got married to a bald guy, Mustafa Chamron. And she says, what? Is he bald? 2 months after marriage, she had not noticed the bald spot on Mustafa Chamron's head. That day when he comes home, he opens the door. She tells him, bend down. And she sees the bald spot for the first time and she starts laughing. He says, I had never noticed the bald spot. That was the akhlaq of Mustafa Chamron. It attracts this lady. So she goes with him, and after the Iranian Revolution, they move from Lebanon to Iran. And he says, I'm going to serve Imam Khomeini. There again, he says, I'm not interested about Kurdistan and this part of Iran and that part of Iran. He says, I want an Islamic Ummah. Imam Khomeini was out there to establish an Islamic Ummah. That is what we are going to fight for. And there also, he was given the post of a defense minister. So he should have stayed in Tehran. He says, no, I don't want to stay in Tehran. He goes to the battlefield. He was seen in Kurdistan, he was seen in Ahwaz, fighting on the war front. So there's a book, I Miss Chamron, written or narrated by his wife. It's a must read. If you get hold of it, it's a small book, hardly 40, 50 pages. I Miss Chamron. So she talks about the personal life of Chamron. Simple things. When she was getting married, her mother tells Chamron that this girl that you're getting married to, Ghada, she's a spoiled girl. When she wakes up in the morning, even before coming off her bed, she needs to be served coffee in bed. She has to be given coffee in bed. Chamron says, I will do this. So till the time of his Shahada, on the morning of his Shahada, on that day also, in the morning he brought coffee for her. And he would make the bed for her. Ghada is relating this. He gave me coffee every single day for as long as we were together. When he was traveling, of course I would miss my coffee. But for as long as he was in town, he served me coffee and he would make the bed at home. So personal instances from this book. But there's a biography of Chamron written by Ayatollah Khamenei. We are told that you only see what you know. When you look at people through the eyes of a mujtahid, you get to see what they are seeing. So when I look at the life of Chamron, I'll say, yes, okay, he did this, and he got martyred. But see what Ayatollah Khamenei sees in this man. He interacted with him and see what he says. Ayatollah Khamenei says in 1979, when Chamron was still in Beirut, he sent an audio clip, 2 hours long, to Ayatollah Khamenei, explaining as to what is happening in Lebanon. So based on that, Ayatollah Khamenei says that this man had a very clear political insight. He was a politician, but his theories were correct. He says he was a light in the fog of fitna. So whenever there's a fitna, there's fog. He says you need clarity, you need light. And he says Chamron was that. Then he says he had a very soft heart. And that is shown by the orphans that he takes care of in Beirut. 400 orphans he took care of in Beirut. And even when he would drive, whenever he would see an orphan on the road, he would stop the car, come off the car, put the orphan on his lap, stroke his head, and he would weep. He says, what's happening to these children? So he had a very soft heart. Ayatollah Khamenei says that he was in search of God. He was not trained by a mystic, but yet he had a very soft heart because he was in search of Allah. Then Ayatollah Khamenei says he was not a dry person. He was not a boring person. He was a photographer. And he was an artist. And then he says he was a man of prayer. Now this is something very common amongst all the shuhada. The importance that they gave to Salah. Their lives rotated around Salah. When he was made the defense minister, Ayatollah Khamenei says he gave it up. He says he was not attracted by this world. These worldly positions did not appeal to him. He said he wanted to be on the battlefield. He says he was always present where he was needed. Wherever there was a need for Chamron, he would be there. Ayatollah Khamenei is describing this man. And then the crux. Ayatollah Khamenei describes it very well. He says there was both science and faith in him. These days we tell faith is different and science is different. Our boys go abroad to study. When they come back, because of their studies, they don't give importance to faith. In fact, some of them lose their faith altogether. We have girls who lose their hijab. There are boys and girls who become atheists. Chamron went to the US, he maintained his faith. So Rahbar says he had both science and faith in him. He had both tradition and modernity in him. He didn't differentiate between tradition. There are some people who are traditional and there are some people who are modern. He says he had both in him. He said he had both theory and practice in him. And then he said he had both love and logic in him. He had logic, but he also had love. He had both fire and water in him. So he says he's a role model. He's a role model for the international. He's an international figure. But the definition of international here, he says it's not beyond borders. Ayatollah Khamenei says, to me, international means a person with all these combinations. A person who is both traditional and modern. A person who has both science and faith in him. A person who has both love and logic is truly an international figure. And this is my vision for the Islamic Ummah. We need more of Chamron in our country. So Chamron, he elevated himself to a level whereby he even predicted his shahada. He was in a position, he comes and tells his wife in Ahwaz. So he goes to Tehran for a conference, and the conference was supposed to be of 2 days. And the wife was in Ahwaz. So the wife was not expecting Chamron on that day, but he came back. So she tells Chamron that we were expecting you after 2 days. Why did you come back today? And he says that I decided to come back for you, he tells. So Ghada says that you've never come back for me. You've come back for the war. She says, no, this time I came back just for you. I've never used a private aircraft. This time from Tehran to Ahwaz, I used a private aircraft just to be with you on this night. And then Chamron tells her that tomorrow I will be martyred. But only if you give me the consent. God is waiting for your consent. If you allow martyrdom to happen, it's going to happen tomorrow. And she takes it jokingly, knowing that he goes every day and he comes back. But she says, on that day I said, okay, I give you the consent. On that night, she hears him weeping on the prayer mat in Salatul Layl. So she wakes up and says, why are you weeping? And Chamron says, in this world, we need to go back with Prophet. Whatever capital that God has given us, a person who uses up that capital and goes empty-handed back to his Lord is definitely a loser. This is the interpretation of Surah Asr. Wal Asr, innal insana lafi khusr, illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihat, wa tawasaw bil haqq wa tawasaw bis sabr. So he says, through Salatul Layl we can make profits in life. And we need to go with its profits back to Lord. But then she tells him, but you've got all the blessings in life. Why are you still weeping? So he says, even waking up for Salatul Layl is a blessing. I need to thank Allah for that. And he would prolong his sajda, and his salat was different. And the very same day, he gets martyred. When he goes, there was a bomb attack and he passes away. And he's martyred. So this in a nutshell is his life. But when you talk of Salatul Layl, this was a common practice amongst all the shuhada. And this is something that we can start with if you want to take something from their lives. Ayatollah Lankarani, a big mujtahid of our times, he says during the Iran-Iraq war, I thought of going to the battlefield and just giving a moral boost to the soldiers. So he goes there and he says, I'm just going to spend one night. So they tell him, why don't you spend more time here? He says, no, my legs will not allow me. I'm an old man. I have a lot of problems with my legs. Please allow me, I want to go back. So when he spends the night, middle of the night, he hears weeping. When he looks out of the window, he sees the soldiers have dug their own graves. They're standing in their graves and praying Salatul Layl. And Ayatollah Lankarani asks himself, he says, I have reached this state, but look at these people. I'm considered to be a mujtahid, but these people are far higher than I am. They were all weeping in Salatul Layl. He ends up staying there for 3 more days. Shaheed Baronsi was another Shaheed. So his friend narrates this. He says, one night I heard Baronsi weeping. And we soldiers were all used to hearing the sounds of weeping at night, because everybody would be praying and doing istighfar. So I heard Baronsi weeping. He wept and I thought he might be praying, but then I went to his room and I peeped inside. When I peeped in, I saw Baronsi was sleeping. He was in his dreams, but he was weeping in his dreams. So he says, I put my ears and I was just listening. And he says, I heard Baronsi talking to Bibi Fatima alayhi salam in his dreams. He's saying, Bibi, he starts mentioning a list of shuhada, his friends. This person is martyred, this person is martyred, this person is martyred. Bibi, when is it going to be my turn to be martyred? In his dreams. So we are told that in gatherings like this, you have the presence of Ahlul Bayt. And this practice has been there for the longest time. On the day of Ashura, there are things that happen physically, but there are things that happen in the spiritual realm. One of the spiritual happenings, we are told, was the presence of Bibi Fatima alayhi salam next to the body of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. She was there. But do you want to hear that it did not stop there? Yes, she comes from a majalis of Imam Hussein. But listen to this story. Shaheed Ibrahim Hadi was another martyr, very brave. Inshallah, when you get time, we'll discuss about him one day. So in the morning, he had gone on an expedition. In the morning after Fajr, they see him coming back, and he was carrying a shaheed on his shoulder, a person who was martyred. When he comes back, he's very tired, and he has this body of the shaheed. So he says, today I'm very relieved. So they ask him, why are you relieved? He says, this shaheed, we had an operation almost 1 month back, but we could not bring back his body. Today I made an effort, I found his body, and I brought it back. So immediately the burial arrangements were made in Tehran, and the body was transferred. And everybody, whenever there was a body of shaheed, people would gather for Tashiyah Janazah. So there was a big gathering in Tehran, in that locality where the shaheed was from. And Ibrahim Hadi also goes for the funeral. So when he goes for the funeral happens. Once the body is buried, they're standing outside the mosque with his friends, he's talking. And they see an old man coming. An old man walks to Shaheed Ibrahim Hadi and tells him, when he looks at his face, They recognize that he is the father of that Shaheed. So the father walks over to Shaheed Ibrahim Hadi. He says, I really appreciate what you did. You brought my son back. His body was lost. You brought it back. I really appreciate it. But can I tell you something? And Shaheed Ibrahim Hadi starts listening to him. He says, my son is not happy with you. So now Ibrahim Hadi is shocked. He says, why isn't he happy with me? So he says, my son, the father is narrating now, that my son came in my dreams last night. And he says, for as long as I was lying alone on the plains, for as long as my body was not found, every day Bibi Fatima would come and sit next to my body. Now that the body has been brought back, there is no sight of Bibi. So I complain that why did Ibrahim Hadi bring back my body? So the father says, my son has a complaint against you. Ibrahim Hadi starts weeping. But he says, I've made up my mind that if I have to die, I want to die in such a way that my body is never ever found. Why? Because I want to be with Bibi ever and ever again. I want to be with her forever. I don't want her to leave my body. And really, till today, Shaheed Ibrahim Hadi's body has not been found. After the war, they tried to look for it. They call it Gumnam. And this was his wish. He says, there's a possibility that when my body comes back, some people might feel proud for my achievement. My family might feel proud. I don't even want that. I don't even want my body to come back. I want to just lie down there on the plains in the presence of Bibi. So these are figures that we can emulate, we can learn from. They are role models for us. Yes, the way they died is also a lesson, but their daily lives. Martyrdom is something that cannot be attained, but it is granted by Allah. If you want to be martyred, you have to lead a life, a worthy life, and then God grants you Shahada. I came across a war veteran in Iran when I was there last time, and he says that I went to the battlefield and I could see bullets flying next to my head. I really wanted martyrdom, but it was not granted. And there were people who would come to the battlefield, they would have only one meal with us, and the very next moment they would be martyred. He says, I struggled for 7 to 8 years, I was not martyred. And he weeps still today that I did not get Shahada. He says, maybe Allah had a different role for me. Shaykh Qasim Soleimani, same thing. He was in search of martyrdom for 40 years. And he kept on weeping that all my friends are gone. Why aren't I getting Shahada? But he led such a life that it was granted to him. A big lesson for us is on this function that we've gathered for. Yes, we are remembering our marhumin, but it's a time to look at the shuhada, the lives of shuhada, make them role models, improve our lives, and indeed make it a spiritual moment and elevate ourselves, inshallah. May Allah increase our tawfiq. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.